Hi everyone, my name is Michal and today we'll talk about the most recent questions that have been seen across all EASA authorities from the topic of human performance and limitations, and more specifically the subject of basic aviation psychology. Now, of course, I know that HPL is a very dreaded subject and many people say that you'll get the most by only studying the database and the question bank. However, there are some key principles to remember when it comes to basic aviation psychology that I'll try to explain today with the help of these 5 questions that have been seen across all EASA authorities, like I mentioned before. So let's jump into question number 1. What are the communication qualities of a good briefing? And you will see as you go through these questions, a lot of them refer to the briefings. And once you start flying, especially instrument rating, and then later when flying in a multi-corporation cruise, so in the airlines essentially, you'll see that it's very hard to pay attention to a briefing that's longer than a minute or 2 minutes. And you'll see a lot of different jokes and memes going around about it. So remember, the basic and most important quality of a briefing is for it to be concise and short in order for the other crew member and you yourself as well be able to pay attention to it. And this will be in most, if not all, the answers in the database. So always, first of all, look for the answer that includes the briefing being short. And here we can see that the short and precise briefing is under number 3, which is only in the answer Bravo. So this gives us a good indication from the beginning of what the correct answer will be. However, going through other possible answers, we also have contains as much information and be as comprehensive as possible. This contradicts the short and precise briefing, the standard type so that it can be reused for another flight of the same time. Of course, briefings always have to be standard, and you'll see, especially when flying later on in your career in an actual airline, it helps a lot when you fly with different crew members, but they still use the same outline and the same structure of a briefing. It will be easier to follow up and understand in general. And lastly, be understandable to the other crew members. Of course, the main idea and purpose of the briefing is to have a good situation awareness and for both crew members to be on the same page and be able to cross-check each other to catch any errors. And this is why you brief the other crew member, so he can check if everything you did and said was done correctly. So now question number 2. An aircraft operating with the FMS in the LNAV VNAV mode is operating in a busy terminal area at the end of a flight. Bad weather in the area has resulted in the ATC requiring the flight crew to make several changes to the aircraft's flight path. What is the best action for the pilots to take in order to maintain the maximum awareness of their flight status? So of course, you'll be flying in a NAV mode or LNAV or VNAV modes, which refer to lateral and vertical navigation, when you will be flying and transitioning from a cruise phase into the arrival and approach phases later on. And the flight management system, the FMS, is a computer inside of an aircraft that you input information about the navigation routes that you will be following, and then the aircraft can accurately follow these routes, and these are based on the navigation database that is inside of an aircraft that needs to also be updated every 28 days. That's a heads up for Airlo. And now, when you are coming in to an airport that is busy, especially if it's a big airport, most often they'll have a radar service, which will give you vectors to the final approach, meaning they'll give you headings and altitudes. And contrary to what you might believe, it's the simplest and most effective way of performing these vectors is simply to switching to heading and altitude modes. And this will be clear once you're start flying, first in the instrument phase and then later, of course, with the big jets, because if the, for example, the controller gives you a direct course to a certain point, they will do that. However, most often this will be done by simply giving you a heading. So turn left heading 070, descent altitude 3000. In that case, playing with the FMS will be very inefficient and time consuming, and it's the simplest to simply change to an altitude and heading mode. Of course, you can also fly manually. However, this will depend mainly on the airline's SOPs. Some airlines will allow it, some will not. However, you're still a pilot and you're still in control. Autopilot, being your third crew member, can take this workload off of you. However, you're still flying the aircraft, So there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking control of it, especially in such critical phases of flight. And making the answer D the correct one, is this is the one that mentions the altitude. And actually going back to the question, of course, there is a risk of being distracted, but one of these answers actually makes sense. Of course, switching the FMS, you should never do that. I don't think it's even possible in normal operation. LNAV is the primary mode. It is very, very accurate system. However, like I mentioned, when you're flying and you're getting these vectors, you will be given altitudes and headings. So flying with FMS will be very time consuming and inefficient. It's simplest to just turn the knobs, and you'll also announce always the heading changes and altitude changes, making these operations very, very safe anyway. So for question number 3, a pilot is learning how to recover from an undesired aircraft state, which is undesired aircraft situation. Which option is correct as regards to the role of SOPs in reducing the risk of an accident? So during my training, one of the instructors said in the past something that stuck with me forever. And I still remember today, after around 2 years, that SOPs are written in blood, which is a bit over dramatic. However, you get the general idea. The SOPs, or the standard operating procedures, are made by the companies in order to increase the efficiency, to make the whole operation standardized, so you can fly with different crew members in the same way, and that you can change crew members without any difficulties. However, also they are there because something has happened in the past, which made the company learn about the mistakes and make sure that the new procedures increase the safety and efficiency operation, with an emphasis on safety. So what is the correct option in the case of undesired aircraft states? SOPs can state the minimum attitude for the maneuver and the conditions under which the instructor should take control of the aircraft. So this can be instructor or pilot. I believe this answer is actually correct. There's nothing wrong with it. The SOPs can state the minimum attitude for the maneuver. For example, if you're entering a hold, your SOPs will say you cannot bank more than 20 degrees. By law, it's maximum 25, or rate 1 turn, whichever higher. Of course, this is a different situation, but let's say, just for the sake of this argument, SOPs allow you to turn with only 20 degrees. And if you go over 25, so plus minus 5, then the instructor takes over, or the captain takes over. In that case, the SOPs can state anything. They can also refer to altitudes, they can also refer to speeds, and anything like this, stating minimum and maximum deviations, or situations where you as a first officer or a captain can take over. Of course, SOPs will also outline situations where the first officer can take over the captain. For example, if there is an incapacitation check during flight and the instructor is not responding, or you feel your safety is breached. And that's the correct answer. For question number 4, during the cruise at night, when the workload is low, it is recommended that. And now, here there is a keyword in the question which says during the cruise. So there will be 2 questions asking about the lights and dimming in the cockpit. Actually 3 types of them. One will be during the cruise, like this one. So during the cruise, remember that your main threat here is hypovigilance. So if you're sitting in a cockpit, it's a 3-hour flight, 2-hour flight, and you are in the cruise at your top of climb, you have 1 hour until top of descent. If it's a night, the lights are dimmed, it's very easy to start feeling sleepy and tired. So dimming the lights could actually increase the risk of you falling simply asleep. So during the cruise at night, you will not dim the lights fully. You will try to keep them alive, trying to keep the cockpit lit, just because it's much easier to stay alert and not fall into the hypovigilance trap. Some questions will ask you about the approach and the last phases of flight. In these cases, at night, you will dim the lights, mainly because you need your eyes to adjust to the outside environment, so that you can see the runway and the airport and the features around better, because of course at night it's already hard to see in general. So if your eyes are getting used to a lit cockpit, then it will be very hard to see stuff outside of the cockpit in the dark. If you dim the lights, it will make all the features outside much easier to spot. Another thing I wanted to mention are thunderstorms, and some questions will ask you what to do with the lights in the cockpit during a thunderstorms. So of course we never fly through thunderstorms, but you'll fly next to or above or through, not through, but between the thunderstorms, I wanted to say. So what do you do with the lighting in the cockpit in that case? In that case, you will increase the lights in the cockpit as well. And this is because if there is a lightning, the lightnings can be extremely bright, they can actually blind you momentarily, because if your eyes are adjusted to a dark cockpit, then a sudden lightning will make a flash and it will take a couple seconds for your eyes to adjust back to the dark environment in the cockpit. This is why we turn the lights on, not to be blinded by the lightnings in the cockpit during thunderstorms. So going back to the question, the lightning in the cockpit will be increased in order to prevent low vigilance, and this, in my opinion, makes absolute sense. So don't fall into the trap of missing the cruise, thunderstorm, or approach keywords in the questions for this type of questions. And for the last question here, in the context of operating a complex and highly automated aircraft, the term mode awareness is used to describe. So of course, first things that you will learn during your training or at the end of the training, when you'll start doing the multi-crew cooperation courses, MCCs, is that you always call out the mode changes on the autopilot, on the flight mode annunciator, FMA. Whenever something changes, you as the pilot flying, or if the pilot flying misses it, the pilot monitoring, then you need to call it out in order for everyone in the cockpit to know what's happening with the aircraft. An example would be, for example, as you change from LNAV, VNAV, or NAV into a heading mode during vectors, you will always call heading select as the mode that is now being in use. And this is made so there is no flight mode, so there is good flight mode awareness in the cockpit, and that everyone knows what the aircraft is doing if we are using the automation, which of course always should be used to its optimum extent during the flight. So going through the questions, flight mode awareness. Pilot should maintain situational awareness as regards to appropriate automation mode required for a particular phase of flight and the opportunity for manual flight input to interact with various modes. No. Automation system should provide feedback, including requirements for specific pilot to input depending on the particular phase of flight. No. The current mode in which the cockpit automation is operating should always be transparent to the pilot, and that the interface allows the pilot interaction, including manual override of the automation. This makes sense. The pilot should always be aware of the automation mode under which the aircraft is operating and understand the interaction between mode and automation and particular flight. This one makes the most sense by far, and I believe this will be the correct answer. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining. I hope your HPL goes smoothly. I know how hard it can be, as some questions are very hard and not that aviation related. However, you'll see that as you progress with your training, all the bits and pieces from HPL will come together and make a very smooth ride when studying for your ratings in the future, such as instruments and then MCC. And also it all comes together as a general ATPL knowledge, and it will help you a lot. However, thank you so much for joining, and I'm sure I'll see you next time when we'll revise the most recent questions from different subjects and maybe even HPL in the future. So have a great day, and bye-bye.